I'm finally back and I have more time now to spend on Albion, which means that we are gonna start getting better at PvP together once again. Today, we will do this by breaking down some fights, with our main focus being catching the kiters, or kiting the catchers, whichever side you are on. In this first fight, I'm playing the one-handed spear against Bow of Badon. I am one tier lower, but I have 7 Abbey buff stacks more than him, and I have a Rose buff. So overall, I have a decent advantage going into this fight. Primarily, this fight should come down to one question. Can I use my mobility well enough to catch him, or will he be able to keep the space between us and kite me? It is my job obviously to close the gap, so I use my boots, and he uses his E and stands inside it to trade with me. He uses his invisibility to waste out the remainder of my Inferno shield, which is a bit risky because I have Stalker Hood, but it works out, and after that I'm forced to use my other mobility spell, my E, to close the gap once again. Remember, my job is to catch, his job is to kite. After he uses his frost shot, I have no way to catch him, so he's doing a decent job kiting so far, and I start walking away to avoid letting him do free damage to me while I wait for my boots and E to be ready again. This moment here is a crucial moment in this fight. Since you are looking at my perspective, you can see very obviously that a couple more seconds, my mobility will be ready and I'm getting back in there. But for him, from his perspective, he's doing okay in the fight and he wants to follow me so that I don't disengage. And this ends up being a big mistake, because when my cooldowns are ready, I can just get on top of him and he does not have frost shot, he doesn't have his invis, so his only option is either stand and fight me or use boots, which I then cripple off, and it's a pretty easy kill. Let's take 2 more lessons from this situation before we move on. First of all, the Hunter Hood, well, here it was pretty useless. I think in general it's a very weak choice if you go into the mists with higher IP. I've talked about this in other videos, but if you insist on using it, here's a tip. Against Stalker Hood users, such as myself here with the spear, use your Hunter Hood the moment you see your enemy using Stalker Hood. That is usually the time when they will want to go for big damage, so you will either reflect it or you will at least deny them that Stalker Hood buff duration. I'll show you a good example of this in a couple minutes. And finally, check out the build of my opponent here. Can you notice what's wrong? There's a couple things that are suboptimal, but there's one which is absolutely criminal, and that's that this man is using a 5 million silver set, but only 5,000 silver food and potions. This is way out of proportion. He should be using much better consumables, and it's generally not a good idea to equip your potions before the fight. Imagine if he started winning this fight and I decided to disengage. How sad would it be for him to not be able to throw a poison at me to finish me off because he already equipped healing potions at the start. And if you're thinking, well, that sounds a bit complicated and you're not yet ready to do this potion juggling in the fight, that's absolutely fine. But then it's probably not yet a good time to play 8.1 like this player here. Next up, we have my 4-4-6-3 Deathgivers against a 5-4-7-3 Bow of Badon. This situation is similar to the last one. The key question of the fight is, am I able to catch him and stay on top of him, or will he be able to kite me around while doing damage? I start with Shadow Edge and he uses his E to brawl and create a little bit of space again. Notice that he uses Soldier Helmet to avoid taking reflect damage because this fight is just before the patch. This is no longer necessary for Bow of Badon. I keep using my mobility to stay on top of him and check out his smart decision. He actually changed to Inferno Shield instead of Invis against my Stalker Hood. And he didn't waste his Inferno right away, but uses it exactly when I'm getting my 3rd stack. That is very well played. Once his Inferno is over, it's time for him to start kiting again. But here comes the critical mistake. He did not change his boots to a regular sprint. He's still on Royal March, which really can be nice for a lot of situations and it's a very popular choice for the mists, but Shadow Edge is a good counter. I'm able to interrupt his march, which means that now he's pretty much without boots. Because of this, I can catch him and finish the job. If he was able to get his boots off, which actually almost happened, then it's very likely that he would have been able to either disengage and reset or kite me enough to maybe win the fight. Let's have a quick talk about the ending of this fight though. Here he has two distinct options. He doesn't have boots anymore, he can either stand his ground and pray, hope for the best, or he can try to run away. Here he casted his E, he has soldier helmet ready, he has Martlock cape, he has I think a pretty good shot at just standing and winning this. All he needs is for me to make one big mistake, like for example accidentally using my E on his soldier helmet, and I think he can win. He instead decides to try to disengage. And for this he needs one crucial thing to happen. He needs me to miss my Shadow Edge. Remember this as a bit of a more general lesson. If you're trying to disengage from a dagger on Shadow Edge, you kind of need to zigzag to dodge it. It's a very difficult skill shot to land. If I miss this Shadow Edge here, then he is probably free to go. Let's check out an example from the other side, the kiting side. Here I am the Bow of Badon, and I'm against Clarent Blade. And give props to this player for trying the fight, because it's a very hard matchup for him. And I will show you why. Just like before, he needs to catch me and get on top of me. But Clarent Blade doesn't have any real mobility. With Q stacks and splitting stash, it's not impossible for him to catch me, but it is very difficult. Probably the best way for him to do it is to somehow bait me into using my mobility to catch him and then turning around and surprising me. But this would require some sort of higher level baiting. Did you see that? I'm not used to bows and I completely messed up my frost shot. But I still have boots, and he doesn't because he had to use them to try to close the gap. Honestly, during this zigzag moment here, I should probably use my soldier helmet to avoid splitting slash, and he needs to try to actually hit his splitting slash, which he for some reason doesn't. He waits until I already have distance before rooting me, and now I'm back to my kiting. After I use my mobility aggressively to catch up to him, it's actually now his chance to fight back because he can get on top of me, but unfortunately for him, the HP difference is now already big enough for me to be able to win this fight even without kiting. Finishing the job here is not so difficult, but I want to show you something that happens right after this fight. Check out this rat. It's a 4.2 claymore, so this isn't really a serious fight. It's obviously very strongly in my favor. But check out this detail. I block his E with my soldier helmet. And this is not because some sort of superhuman reaction, not at all. Only thing I did is exactly what I mentioned earlier in our first fight. The moment I saw him use his stalker hood, I just clicked my soldier helmet. The same logic applies to hunter hood. And it worked. Keep this trick in mind if you ever have a good defensive spell and your enemy is on stalker hood. Let's look at one more. Daybreaker against Bow of Badon. As always, he needs to kite, I need to catch. Daybreaker is probably one of the best, if not the best weapon for catching kiters in the mists, so this should be simple, right? We're both playing for 4-6-3 in this fight. This fight looks almost like it's turn-based. It's like we're playing chess or Baldur's Gate 3. I use my helmet to catch, turn 1. He uses frost shot to space away. I use my boots to catch. He uses his trap. I use my E to catch. He uses his E to create space again. I use my helmet to catch again. He uses Invis to keep kiting me. It's beautiful. This type of fight usually favors the person doing the catching, because kiting is much more difficult. He has to be precise. If he wastes a spell or frost shots himself into the wall or something, it's going to be much easier for me to punish him than the other way around. I hope you noticed this nice move he made here. He came one step closer to me to make sure that he slows me with the frost shot. This is a big deal for his kiting. But as I said, Daybreaker is still wonderful at catching even good kiters, so once I'm able to cripple his boots, this game of cat and mouse is over. However, somehow he survives my E and he gets away in Undead Cape very narrowly, but the idea stands. Maybe I shouldn't have thrown my poison at him at the random moment earlier in the fight. Good lesson. Badon feels pretty awesome after the last patch, but let's look at a different kiter for a second, the Frost Staff. Although this is a great frost, which isn't necessarily a kiting weapon, but my opponent here is using W blink and invis on his jacket, so he clearly wants to kite. I'm using Q2 and Shadow Edge, which both make Deathgivers really good at catching kiters, but it also makes me weaker at brawling. If I was this great Frost player, I would just go full brawl. He could take Frost Lance on W, he could change his jacket to Inferno and stand his ground and fight me and probably win. But he wants to kite, so let's see if I can catch him. Shadow Edge hits, he blinks away. I use my E to close the gap, he uses boots, and now since I used my E, I still have boots and I can use them to match his boots and keep the pressure on. He uses invis on top of me, which is a very clear mistake. Against Stalker Hood, you either need to change to Inferno or make sure you're far away from your enemy when you invis. After using his blink, he needs to dodge my Shadow Edge, but luckily I'm able to hit it here and the fight should be over. But I'm a giant noob and mess up my Stalker Hood somehow, so he gets away in Undead Cape. But the fight is not completely over. We meet again in about a minute and we decide to go for round 2. Notice that he still hasn't learned his lesson about invis and he doesn't change to Inferno. If you insist on kiting, I really suggest using One-Handed Frost or Chill Howl. The Great Frost doesn't really offer any additional kiting tools except just simply crazy damage, so it better suits a brawling and baiting type of playstyle. I have two pretty big additional advantages as we are starting this second fight. Number one, the way we dismounted means that I get to start the fight pretty much on top of him. This is a very big thing. And number two, he forgets to eat his food, so he's still on cabbage soup. Whether you are playing a kiter or a catcher, don't underestimate the huge impact of whether the fight starts on top of each other or at a distance. This fight is much easier for me and he never really creates enough distance to start kiting. Notice how much damage he is doing in brawls, by the way. Imagine if he switched to Inferno Shield and Frost Lance like I mentioned earlier. Here, however, once I have 3 stacks, I am able to finish him, this time with proper Stalker Hood usage. If you don't have the tools to catch a kiter, then the only other option you really have is to bait them in. I've been playing quite a bit of Bow of Badon lately, and most of my deaths come from getting baited and impatiently following my enemy. Something like this. The fight starts out going kind of even, but if I had to take this fight again, I would absolutely choose a different Q spell. Especially now that the Prowling jump can be interrupted, I feel like I would have gotten a lot more value from multi-shot. Note that while Armor of Valor is a pretty good counter to Bow of Badon, in order to reflect all this damage back to me, he himself is also standing in my E and also taking the damage, so it kind of balances out. I use my invisibility to counter his boots, and after another Armor of Valor play that he does against my E, he decides to start disengaging. Perhaps he's afraid of the Heron Spear killing Wolpertingers at the edge of the screen, or he's trying to consciously bait me in. And here's my big mistake. I follow him and use my boots in order to keep the pressure on, but I don't have my mobility ready now and I used my soldier helmet earlier against his polymorph, so I am pretty much defenseless and he has successfully baited me in to die. And this is another example of why it's more complicated to be the kiter in the fight. Not only do you have to use your spells more precisely, but also it's not so easy without a lot of experience to really understand the exact moment when you can stop kiting defensively and you need to become aggressive. This carving sword misuses all of his catching tools and as a result I'm able to maintain the kiting distance while winning a little bit in HP. Just like I did in the very first fight of this video, he's now walking away to avoid taking 3 damage. I use my Frost Shot aggressively to follow him, and now look at my perspective. If he uses his E to come back into me and force a brawl, well, I have Invis, I have Soldier Helmet, but my mobility tools are on cooldown for quite some time, so he will be able to stay on top of me and it will be a pretty good fight for him. Partly this is my lack of experience with bows, but in big part it's also just the big difficulty of making these sorts of decisions. When to use your mobility aggressively as a kiter, and it's quite simple to be punished like in some earlier examples we saw. In this case, however, he decides to full disengage, so I get an easy kill as he's trying to mount up. As always, I'm very happy to have you here. Don't forget to like the video or write any opinions you have about the fights you saw in the comments. And now let's enjoy together this one lucky fight that almost completed half the journal for the corrupted dungeons for me.